People who are pretty sure they've encountered a serial killer. What happened? I had an employee that worked for me doing minor maintenance repairs on construction equipment. One day it just took him way too long on a job and I was pissed. I pulled the GPS info and he was nowhere near where he was supposed to be. My admin and I both called him repeatedly with no response. Now I'm even more pissed because this wasn't the first time he took too long or didn't answer his company provided Nextel radio. We start digging. Find out it has happened repeatedly. He got back late and I waited for him, alone, in my office. I terminated him and he took it surprisingly well. Surprised me because I dealt with a ton of BS as a woman working in a male-dominated field and company. A few years later, I'm working in a different location for the same company and some cops show up and want to know what I remember about him. I tell them I fired him, etc. They subpoena the GPS records from the company. Then they started finding the rest of the bodies. He pled down and pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was picking up prostitutes in the company work truck, killing them and dumping bodies in a rural part of the neighboring county. And you were alone with him after hours, firing his ass? Even years later I would have absolutely pooped myself in terror putting two and two together. Yeesh. That is absolutely crazy. I wonder how many victims the man had. I once sat in my car at the back of a country lane car park eating pizza in the dark with a friend, no street lights and just woods surrounding. Finished up and turned on the headlights and all we could see was a man-army crawling towards the car, which was a few meters away. I have never turned the ignition so fast and sped off in my life. To make it scarier, the guy just slowly got up and looked at us, didn't try to chase or grab the car or anything. Out of all the responses on this thread, yours just made my heart pound. That is terrifying. Something I find very chilling is that he can do that 100 times and not be arrested. He'll be successful at some point. In a perfect world, you immediately run that guy over, twice. Robert Lee Yates was an Army pilot flying O-58s while I was flying O-1s, same battalion but different company, at Fort Drum, New York. They would send us down to fly helicopter simulators once a year in Pennsylvania to maintain our instrument ratings. We would carpool in one vehicle. Bob had a van with shag carpet in the back, so he would drive about 5 of us during those trips. It was about a 4-hour drive, so we'd joke and tell stories to pass the time. I was a fairly new pilot who enjoyed hearing the veteran pilots tell war stories. Bob was a CW3 at that time and was a bit odd but nothing alarming. 18 years later we see him on TV being charged with multiple killings of prostitutes across several states. He had used a Corvette and a van for the killings. Yes, that same van. From his Wikipedia page. Yates initially solicited the victims. After having sex with them, often in his Ford van, he would kill them and dump their bodies in rural locations. On September 19, 1998, Yates was asked to give a DNA sample to Spokane police after being stopped. He refused, stating that it was too extreme of a request for a family man. That gave me major chills. What an utterly monstrous piece of shit person. My grandmother swears she met David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer. My grandfather was stationed in Fort Bliss, so she took her 3 daughters camping in Elephant Butte State Park, the same place where he was a ranger. She said a ranger kept trying to get them to stay in his trailer instead of camping by the lake. Obviously they refused and went on a hike, but when they came back their campsite was trashed, so she packed them all up and drove home in the dark. When I got into true crime and was telling her how close he was to us, she relayed the story, and when I showed her a photo she said that it was definitely him, just aged a bit. Not his usual mo, but this would have been in the mid-70s and no one's exactly sure how long he killed for. Years ago, when the internet was more like the Wild West, some website had his audio tape that he would play for his victims as an orientation of what was about to happen to them. It was some of the sickest shit imaginable. Read further at your own peril. In the tape he was basically explaining to his victims on day 1 what was going to happen to them. He called them meat and went into detail how they were going to be violated, trained how to both give him oral and his wife. He went on to explain that he liked to breed his slaves with his German Shepherd and there was a 50-50 chance his dog would find the right hole. He also said they would be made to do these acts in front of his friends and to his friends at parties. This is a definitely encountered a serial killer rather than pretty sure. I grew up in a small town in North Wales, UK. The local cinema had been closed for 15 years, but a guy from out of town had reopened it. As kids, this blew our minds, as it was a rural area, with very little to offer in terms of entertainment, so it seemed unbelievable to us that we would actually have a cinema in town. On one visit to the cinema, I ended up needing to use the toilet during a film, so I left the theater, walked through the foyer and into the toilet. There was no toilet paper, so I went back into the foyer and spoke to the cinema owner to ask if he had any toilet paper. I was younger than 10 at the time and very nervous about speaking to adults, but the owner was incredibly kind and friendly, gave me the toilet paper, and we had a conversation about the film and how happy I was that we now had a cinema in the town. I used the toilet, then went back into the theater. A few weeks later, the friendly cinema man was on the front page of every newspaper. He was Peter Moore. From Wikipedia. Between September and December 1995, he stabbed to death and mutilated 4 men for fun. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in November 1996 with a recommendation that he never be released. He also committed 39 sex attacks on men in North Wales and the Merseyside area over a 20-year period. That last sentence just tacked on there like it isn't fucking major. I worked at a bookstore about 10 years ago. Guys would hit on me or try to get my number and whatever. For some reason the bookstore was the place to go to hit on women. A good-looking guy came in and chatted with me for a minute, got a book, and asked me if I wanted to go to a frat party later. I'm not the party type. Hello, I work at a bookstore, haha. So I declined giving out my number because we clearly enjoy different lifestyles. A few months later, his mugshot is on Twitter with a warrant out for his arrest. He was luring women to a house under the guise of a frat party for a school he didn't go to. You can guess the rest. It was horrible. I didn't get any weird vibe from him that I was aware of. I thank my lucky stars that I am an introvert. I was still using drugs, alcohol at the time, fall 2007, and I met a random guy at the circus in Las Vegas hours after being brought to Vegas, dumped and robbed from California. I ran with a rough crew of thieving drug addicts. Anyway, he invited me back to his place for a drink. A normal looking dude, mid to late 30s, looked like the guy that sang for Sugar Ray. Anyhow, he and I killed a 40, he said he was gonna go roll us a blunt. What he actually did is get a set of handcuffs and a leather strap. He managed to partially handcuff me to the bed and I had a fraction of a second to decide how to respond. Fear, anger and demand to be let go, which I was pretty certain would lead to me being dumped in the desert in a cooler full of Quikrete. Play along like this was fun and sexy and make my escape when possible. So, I ended up being injected with meth and then a very unfun adult evening commenced, with me literally acting for my life. While being stupid high on a drug I hated and did not ever intend to ingest. After he was finished, I asked if he knew where the closest liquor store was, that I'd go out and get us round 2. Took his drink order and strolled out casually. I think I slowly walked it for 2 flights of stairs and then sprinted away, ducking into and then out of different casinos. I ended up homeless and drinking for another year. I'll be 16 years sober this summer, and that dude still haunts me. The vibe shift, the eyes going black and the quickness with which he trussed me up. That wasn't his first time and he seemed like a dead-eyed shark about to pounce. I'm so sorry you had to go through that and I'm glad you survived. Big hugs to you. The abuse and neglect is something I was forced to endure during childhood. The crazy, dodgy, dangerous shit I experienced from 19 to 25 while getting loaded is 100% my fault based on choices I made. It didn't happen to me out of the blue. I put myself in horribly dangerous situations over and over. If a sign said no swimming, piranhas, and I swam anyway, would anybody really feel bad for my bites? I know what he did was wrong, but his part isn't my business. My business is managing the risks I put myself through and maintaining my sobriety. Whilst I was at university, I worked at a cafe in a local shopping center. One of our regular customers was a mum and son who would come at breakfast most mornings. The mum was delightful, however the son always seemed a bit off. Nothing major, just you'd say have a great day and he'd reply with yes. Anyway, one day he comes in without his mum and his breakfast. The next day his face is all over the news as he had just been arrested for murdering his mum. Edit, just to address some of the comments, the son was of adult age and reportedly suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Mum was his carer. I don't know if serial killer but definitely trafficker or child predator. Some background. My stepdad was a truck driver, so often we would visit him at a local truck stop when he was near to grab breakfast, etc. My mother is not great. During one of these adventures my mom decided she wanted us to stay with stepdad in the truck. My sister was 11, I was 9. During this 2-week period. Lol. We were in a random truck stop in the Georgia. My sister and I went to go take a shower, because we hadn't for days, and shared a shower to save on money. I was in and out and waited in the hallways for my sister. A man came up to me and started asking questions. This happened in the early 2000s, so I had been taught stranger danger, but also was still being taught to always be respectful to adults bullshit. I was giving him basic answers. But then he pushed showing me his truck. My tiny self was terrified, but I kept saying no, I can't. Eventually he got annoyed and just grabbed my arm and started pulling. At that moment my sister came out and snatched my ass back and we ran. Crying, telling my mom. I'm called over dramatic. If my sister didn't see me, I'm positive I would have never been seen again. Traveling out of state for a vacation with my kids, at a gas station this man starts trying to talk to my young daughter. I immediately got between them, but not before my daughter blurted out exactly where we were going and how long we would be there. I suddenly felt sick. Something about the guy scared me. I just knew there was going to be a problem. I hustled the kids back to the car and waited to drive away out of fear he might follow us. I didn't see him come out, so eventually I drove off, but I was paranoid about it afterward. 2 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone banging aggressively on our door. He was screaming that he was with security for the complex and that there was an intruder seen in the area, so I was required by law to open the door. Obviously I didn't fall for that. He started swearing and threatening me. Suddenly he just stopped. Suddenly something spooked him and he turned and bolted. He had been standing kind of off to the side and reaching over to bang on the door in a way I couldn't see his face. When he moved, I saw it. It was the guy from the gas station. He followed us through 2 states. The actual security for the complex drove around but never found him. There was a broken gate next to the condo that they said he got in through. I'm definitely sure I have, because my cousin is one. We were quite close, before it was revealed to me and the rest of our family that he is a monster, and our last encounter was in September 2020, when he hugged and consoled me at my dad's viewing. His death wasn't related to the cousin. Roughly 6 weeks later he killed his final victim and was arrested 2 weeks after that. That's when we all found out the truth about him. The fact that he consoled you about your father's death makes the whole thing even more terrifying. I know serial killers can be charming, but it's absolutely bizarre to think that someone is capable of having that much empathy with no clear personal motive, in between killing strangers. I know. He also referred to my brother as his little buddy, and they were particularly close, which now makes me so angry because my brother is autistic, as was his final victim. 2 of the others had unspecific learning difficulties. I also set him up with a close friend of mine who fits in his victim pool, but thank God he didn't kill her. I assume it's because that would have been too close to home to get away with. Not me, but my coworkers actually worked with a serial rapist, murderer that specifically targeted old ladies. They said he was quiet but nice. Even went out to lunches sometimes. When he got arrested, one of them said they had to call the police. It couldn't be him and that it had to have been a mistake. Nope. There was DNA evidence. To be fair, he did stop his crimes after he started working there. Not a serial killer, but he killed more than half of a whole family. Paid him to remove a problematic tree that I wasn't confident about cutting down without dropping it on my home. He convinced me to save the tree and just remove a few limbs that were dangers. He just seemed like a dude. A month later he murdered everyone in a house except a young girl whom he abducted. He stuffed the bodies of the mother's friend, and son into the hollow of a tree. When his home was later searched, it was full of piles of leaves and wallpaper to look like trees, and the abducted girl was locked in the basement. This sounds like Matthew Hoffman. It was a single mother. He did kill her and the survivor's only brother, as well as the mother's friend, dismembered them and hid them in the hollows of 60-foot-tall trees using his arborist climbing equipment. This was in Howard, Ohio. Yep, I live outside of Howard. He was doing freelance tree trimming, cutting on the side as well, which is how I came across him via a recommendation by another person on my road. Thanks for reminding me those details. I was at a shopping mall in Los Angeles, when a man approached me saying he was a casting agent, photographer. Immediately I knew something was off with the guy, because that's the #1 scam in the book, but he just gave off such vibes that I instinctively knew he was very dangerous. I politely took his card and made a mad dash to the H&M and hid in the dressing stalls. I alerted a staff member and they had security walk me to the car. The gift of fear is real and trusted. About 2 months later I had the news on in the background and I saw his face. He had been arrested for abducting and murdering a girl from Michigan. He approached her the same way he did me. Scariest thing ever. I believe there's a new Dateline podcast series out about it. I used to work in true crime television and I can't even listen to the podcast because it freaks me out of how close I was to this guy. As I said above, we have the gift of fear. For a long time, women were taught to be polite and ignore this even if uncomfortable. It's super important to trust your gut, and as MFM says, fuck politeness. One of the hardest hitting lines in the movie, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, is delivered by the killer after he's discovered. He has captured the person who discovered him. They had already left the killer's house after discovering evidence. As they were walking away, the killer, previously a friend, spots them, opens the door, and says, "Hey, come have a drink, I have some news about your investigation," and the victim, after a moment of thought, accepts. Later the killer asks, "Why did you come back? You knew what I had done." And the victim doesn't really have a response, so the killer continues, "It's because the fear of causing offense is greater than the fear of pain." You wouldn't think so, but it is. I think about this all the time, because my gut has told me something is wrong on multiple occasions. Sometimes I'd listen and sometimes I wouldn't. It's tough because we are taught so early on not to be rude or cause a fuss. Always listen to your gut. Not pretty sure. I'll bet this comment will get buried, but the prolific Canadian serial killer Elizabeth Wetlaufer was in my house. She was my dad's home care nurse very briefly after surgery. I said hi to her, she pretty much ignored me. Very quiet. My dad said she was really off and weird. Most of his other nurses had great bedside manner, but she was very aloof. Luckily she was only there once or twice and showed some restraint with the whole murder thing. God, she showed some restraint with your dad. We considered ourselves lucky for sure. I almost sat next to Richard Ramirez on a bus as he was fleeing San Francisco to go to Los Angeles, where he got caught. I got on a crowded bus to go to work and saw a vacant seat next to a man with long dark hair, whose face I couldn't see. Everyone was leaving him a wide berth, but being a young punk rocker, I said, "Fuck it, I'm sitting there." I started to sit down and he looked up at me. And I backed up. His eyes had nothing human in them. It was like staring into the pits of hell. I stood up with the rest of the passengers. On my break at work, I picked up a newspaper and there he was. It was a composite drawing of the Night Stalker. I suspect my uncle is one. He jokes about murdering cats as a hobby, admitted to having illegal firearms in his house, said he shot his dog because it was suffering, hinted that he killed his ex-wife with an overdose of horse tranquilizer because Chev was suffering from the final stages of cancer, hinted several times how he would murder me, boasted about sleeping with a 13-year-old in China, also saying that he was in contact with the shady folks there. He also has done countless minor illegal shit. He is very well connected, so there is no way he will ever be convicted. I just try to keep contact as minimal as possible, especially now that I have small kids. He is a truly scary man. I am a 38-year-old female, actually worked with a serial killer for a few years. We got hired together, trained together, and continued to remain work friends. He had come over to my home a few times for parties. He never gave me the out-and-out creeps, but one time he asked me to give him a drive home and I just wasn't comfortable giving him a drive home, so I told him my boyfriend was uncomfortable with me being alone with him. He was actually arrested where we worked together. I remember walking out to the parking lot and seeing the police towing his car. I actually texted him to check in and see if he was okay. I found out the next day that he had been arrested and what he had been arrested for. He's the Arizona Canal Killer. Look him up. The thing that bothered me was how so many people who knew him for years and were just as friendly with him as I was, kept saying, "I always knew he was weird. He always gave me the creeps." To them I say, "No you did not, and no he didn't." The guy in question had always been fairly popular. He was a little weird, but a lot of the people we worked with were weird. Still blows my mind how long I knew someone who killed people. My mom grew up in Washington State. When she was 14, she was at a public park with her younger siblings. A man walked up to her holding a dog leash and told her his puppy had escaped, and asked if she would help him look for it. He started leading her toward a more secluded area of the park, and she said he was intensely staring at her the whole time. When she asked what the puppy's name was, he got flustered and said he hadn't named the puppy yet, but was thinking about Max. He told her if she found the puppy, she could choose the name. She said she couldn't explain why, but felt like he was lying and got a really bad feeling. Without saying anything to the man, she turned around and ran back to the park where all the other kids, families were. She got her siblings and went home. Years later she saw the same man on TV arrested for multiple murders. Ted Bundy.